There are 4 character archetypes that define every single major One Piece arc. First, the Good King, the rightful original leader of the kingdom, nation, or island under whom the land was prosperous. Second, the Usurper, the villain of the storyline who is either attempting to dethrone the Good King or has already dethroned him. This is the evil figure who the Straw Hats must in turn defeat or depose in order to restore prosperity and peace to the land. Third, the Princess, the emotional centerpiece of the storyline, usually a girl, who is the native figure of the land who initially befriends the Straw Hats and draws them into the conflict against the Usurper. And finally, the rebel hero, the strong-willed native male warrior of the land, sometimes its renowned champion, sometimes its fallen hero, sometimes its misunderstood outcast, but always the land's primary warrior who must carry the burden of saving the land on his shoulders until the Straw Hats arrive to fight alongside him. We are going to be breaking down how and why Oda structures almost every arc around these 4 archetypes, but more importantly, what this tells us about the surprising role that Loki is likely set to play in Elbaf, and finally, what Oda's recurring storyline with these 4 archetypes tells us about the Void Sentry and Joy Boy's story. But first, I've got an amazing deal for Surfshark VPN for you all. Right now, Surfshark is offering my viewers a deal for less than $3 a month. That's right, while most VPNs cost $13 to $15 a month, right now, Surfshark, the sponsor of this video, is allowing my viewers to use Surfshark for less than $3 a month. Not only that, but any viewers that sign up for Surfshark right now can keep Surfshark VPN at the price of less than $3 a month for up to 2 years if you want. And you'll even get an extra 4 months free. And if you're unsure of whether or not you want to try it out, you can try Surfshark out with 0 risk, because Surfshark is also giving a 30-day money-back guarantee. And in case you don't know what a VPN is, VPNs are what pretty much everyone is using nowadays when they're online. Normally, you are locked to your regional location, but with VPNs, you can change your location to anywhere you want on the planet. You can stream football by switching locations. You can play in game servers in Asia. You can get access to anime that's streaming on Netflix only in Japan. If you're not using a VPN, then you're seriously missing out. And if you are using a VPN, then you should stop wasting so much money and instead switch to Surfshark, which is basically free right now. So get your Surfshark deal today for less than $3 a month. Just go to surfshark.com/Morge for 4 extra months of Surfshark free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Link in the description below, or just scan the QR code. So what needs to be understood first is that the reason Oda so repeatedly relies on these 4 central character archetypes for major islands is because it creates the perfect, reliable arc structure for One Piece. One Piece storylines are traditionally built around the Straw Hats arriving at an entirely new setting to save its people. But for this type of narrative to repeatedly work over and over in a way that is compelling, you need a reliable story structure that can be consistently used to produce effective drama, and this all comes down to building the drama around 4 character archetypes that Oda knows will work. To begin with, obviously, if you want to write a storyline of the Straw Hats saving an island in a narrative of good triumphing over evil, then the first archetype you need is the Usurper. This is naturally the evil figure that must be defeated to bring good back to the land. This figure is either attempting to take over the land when the Straw Hats arrive, such as Wapol, Crocodile, or Hordy, or this figure already succeeded in taking over the land some years ago and now needs to be deposed by the Straw Hats, such as Arlong, Enel, Doflamingo, or Kaido. Now, while this Usurper figure is obviously necessary to have an evil for the Straw Hats to defeat, the important contrast that we now need is the good that the Straw Hats are actually restoring. What is the ideal version of the land that the Straw Hats are actually fighting for here? They're taking back the land from the Usurper and returning it to whom? That is where the second archetype, the Good King, comes in. This is the leader on which the island is actually prosperous. Cobra, Riku, Gonfall, Dalton, and so on are the leaders that represent the ideal version of what the land should be. When they are in charge, everything is good, and either the Usurper took the land from them and made things bad, or the Usurper is in the process of trying to take the land from the Good King. Every land absolutely needs to have a good king to give the Straw Hats conflict meaning, because the Straw Hats on their own are never the type to actually fix an island. They are not interested in being the idealistic heroes who deliver a nation from evil and turn it into a utopia. The Straw Hats are just there to beat up the bad guys. Therefore, we need the good king to represent the ideal version of the land that the Straw Hats are fighting to restore, even if the Straw Hats don't always realize it themselves, but by defeating the Usurper, the Straw Hats are delivering the land back into the care of the good king, who will ensure that peace and prosperity can reign again. Essentially, without the good king representing the good version of the land that can now be restored, the Straw Hats' battles would have no meaning. A notable trend is that this good king figure is often only a mildly capable fighter themselves, as their role is not to win fights. Their role is simply to represent the ideal version of what the land should be, to represent what the Straw Hats are fighting for. But now, because the Straw Hats are outsiders, we also need something to actually emotionally tie the Straw Hats into the conflict of the island. And this is where the role of the princess comes in. The princess is the emotional centerpiece of the conflict, designed to be the character that both the Straw Hats and we the reader connect to. The princess is meant to pull at our heartstrings and make us actually care about the land being saved, just as the princess makes the Straw Hats care. The princess's role is also not to win fights. The role is almost entirely emotional, though this role can also serve as a source of inspiration for other characters. These are figures such as Vivi, Rebecca, and Shirahoshi, of course, but the princess also doesn't always literally have to be a princess. For instance, Nami was essentially the princess for the Arlong Park arc, the native girl of the island who served as the emotional centerpiece that made the reader invested in saving the island, as well as made the Straw Hats invested in saving the island. And the princess doesn't even always have to be a woman. This princess role was actually played by Momonosuke in Wano, for example, which was Oda's first gender-swapped version of this idea. Despite being a boy, Momonosuke was still the sympathetic figure who got the Straw Hats personally invested in saving Wano, who then became the primary dramatic character focus for the arc, and most notably, like other princess figures, Momonosuke was not strong in combat. He was completely helpless when it came to actually being able to fight for his nation. Even after being aged up, he had no combat experience and did not win any fights for Wano, which is why he, like all the other princess figures, needed the Straw Hats' help and brought them into the fold. He was the individual that they chose to lend their strength to. Interestingly, in Skypiea, this princess role was split between Conus and Isa, with the Straw Hats and the reader's emotional connection with the plight of the Skypieans being through Conus, and the Straw Hats and the reader's emotional connection to the plight of the Chandarans coming through Isa. Conus and Isa are less memorable princes compared to the others precisely because they split the role in Skypiea, which makes sense as the Skypiea arc was about two separate islands, both in need of being brought together and settling their differences, the Skypieans and the Chandarans, so each needed a princess figure. And finally, the counterpart of the princess figure is the rebel hero, or alternatively, the warrior. So while the good king and the princess generally stand opposed to the usurper, neither of these figures are usually that strong as fighters. They themselves have no chance against the usurper. But it would be too simple if the Straw Hats swooped in to save some damsels in distress. And that's where the rebel hero comes in. The conflict becomes a lot more dramatic when there is already a genuinely powerful protagonist within the kingdom that aims to defeat the usurper themselves. But even this powerful protagonist ultimately fails to defeat the usurper on their own. The kingdom's strongest champion failing makes it more dramatic and impactful when Luffy and the Straw Hats are able to do what even the rebel hero could not. I refer to this character as the rebel hero as they are usually the force that is actively trying to fight against the evil usurper. We see this clearly with characters like Wiper, Kiros, and Odin. But this figure takes many shapes. In Fishman Island, during Hordy's takeover, it was the prince himself, Fukaboshi, who played the role of the warrior who led the fight back against the new Fishman pirates' conquest. As the primary champion of the kingdom fell when Fukaboshi fell, and Luffy had to come in and do what Fukaboshi could not. Koza was a particularly notable situation where the rebel hero was actually manipulated to fight against the good king instead of realizing that the usurper crocodile was the true threat that he had to overcome until the climax of the arc. Notably, this rebel hero archetype is usually the total opposite and counterpart of the princess. This warrior is often a very stereotypically masculine figure who is very capable in combat. Even though this warrior is destined to be unable to defeat the usurper themselves, they're usually not just some ineffective failure. Fukaboshi ended up fighting alongside Luffy against Hordy. Luffy could not have won without his help. Heros' rebellion led to Usopp defeating Sugar, which led to the liberation of Dressrosa. Wiper was straight up equal to Luffy and actually pulled off the impossible in defeating the invincible Enel. Wiper only fell short because Enel had a get-out-of-jail-free card, and Luffy just ended up being very lucky to have a good matchup against Enel. Odin was a particularly interesting case, where Odin was actually so strong that he seemingly could have resolved the entire conflict and defeated the usurper himself. and therefore Oda had to actually kill Odin off. Oda couldn't allow Odin to continue to live till the modern storyline like he did with Kyros. And Odin's death is a large part of what makes the Wano storyline unique. Wano is a nation that is completely broken as it has actually lost its champion, and therefore Wano has no hope until Luffy arrives. So to sum up, Oda's traditional narrative layout for major arcs where islands need to be saved center around 4 character archetypes that make this type of story work. The conflict is provided by the Usurper, as the Strats need to save the kingdom from him. The Good King represents what the conflict is being fought for, as there is an ideal version of the kingdom that must be restored. The reason that we in the Straw Hats care about this conflict is the princess draws us into it, and the difficulty and stakes of resolving this conflict is established by the rebel hero's struggles in trying to resolve the conflict on his own. These right here are the 4 pillars of major One Piece arcs that make this whole storyline of Straw Hats saving an island actually work, time after time. Interestingly, as the climax of Alabasta approached, Oda even practically spelled out this foundational dynamic outright for the reader, explaining what Cobra, Crocodile, Vivi, and Koza each represent. And from here on, we can see that in all of Oda's largest and most significant island-saving storylines, Oda always hits these 4 character archetypes: Doflamingo, Riku, Rebecca, and Kyros in Dressrosa, Kaido/Orochi, Sukiyaki, Momonosuke, and Odin in Wano, Enel, Gonfall, Kana/Isa, and Wiper in Skypiea, Hori, Neptune, Shirahoshi, and Fukaboshi in Fishman Island. Over and over we see the same concept. In earlier and shorter storylines, Oda simplified the island cast a little bit. Notably, in Arlong Park and Drum Kingdom, the roles of the Good King and the Rebel Hero are both combined. Gen is essentially both the Good King figure of Kokiyashi Village in that he is the leader of the town, but Gen also actively aims to fight and lead the main rebellion against the Usurper, much like we see of other rebel heroes. Dalton similarly took over as leader of Drum Kingdom, and the kingdom healed under him, until Wapol returned, and Dalton then took on the role of the rebel hero in beginning a rebellion against the evil king. So early on, Oda did keep things simple by making the Good King also the rebel hero, while later on, in larger storylines, Oda fleshed things out and separated out the roles of the rebel hero and the Good King, which in my opinion made for more iconic and memorable characters. But first, this month we have some of the most legendary islands in One Piece for you. You can get God Valley, Marijua, Laugh-Tale, and Impel Down. The posters are printed on matte paper, hand cut by the artist himself. Each of these posters can be purchased individually, or you can get all 4 of them together for 50% off. You can also still get the premium package if you want to appear on my streams, and in that case you can also choose any poster from 2024 as well. So if you want God Valley, Marijua, Laugh-Tale, and Impel Down for your walls, just hit the link in the description below. All posters from 2024 will also be available in the complete original set bundle. And while these 4 character archetypes come up repeatedly throughout the story, what's important to note is that Oda is not just telling the same story over and over again. There are a lot of interesting twists and shifts he does on the same concept. As mentioned before, Alabasta was a storyline where the rebel hero of the land was accidentally made to direct his efforts against the Good King. Similarly, in some arcs such as Skypiea and Wano, while it's made clear that things were much better under the Good King's rule before the Usurper took over, it's also made clear that the previous regimes under the Good King were also not perfect, and that a new, better version of the land had to be built fresh after the Usurper was defeated. Under the Good King Sukiyaki's rule, it's established that while Wano was a wonderful and prosperous land, with Kyuri really being the only blemish, at the same time Wano did have certain values even back then, such as its class system and isolationism, that are implied to be faults of the nation that will be changed after Momonosuke takes over. Interestingly, Sukiyaki is the only Good King figure who clearly ruled the land well, but ultimately showed poor moral character when the conflict came. In a similar vein, under Gonfall, the Skypieans were certainly very happy, but the Chandrans were still treated unjustly. Gonfall is still morally a good character compared to Sukiyaki, but the Skypiea arc is clearly a case where even the Good King needed to change the way that he ruled in order to create a true ideal nation after the Usurper was defeated. Oda also incorporates the idea of cycles in some storylines, wherein it's not as simple as the Good King ruled and then the evil Usurper took over, but rather these things switch back and forth over time. That is of course an extremely important theme in One Piece, and so for instance in Drum Kingdom, while in the arc itself Wapol plays the role of the Usurper, Wapol technically was the original king of the island. He was just forced to abdicate his throne. Only then did Dalton step in as leader and fix Drum Kingdom, before Wapol then returned, only now this time in the role of the Usurper. Similarly, in Dressrosa, even though King Riku is the Good King at the start of the whole conflict who is overthrown by the evil Usurper Doflamingo, technically the Don Quixote family were the original rulers of Dressrosa. In Wano, we know that Kurozumi fell from power and then regained it and then lost it again over the course of the storyline. In general, what needs to be understood is that the notion of the Good King and the Usurper are simply titles to establish the symbolic good and evil ruler for the land. But the further we go in the story, we do broaden our horizons to understand that technically who came first doesn't matter. The better ruler is what matters. What's also interesting is how Oda plays with perception in a lot of these storylines. Through the use of deception, the Usurper can manipulate the narrative to rearrange how the general public perceives the roles. Orochi makes himself out to be the rebel hero who overthrew the evil Odin and the Kazuki. Doflamingo does the same in Dressrosa to malign Riku, and Crocodile attempted to do the same to Cobra in Alabasta. We often see the Usurper pretend to be the hero. We often see the Good King being framed as the villain. And interestingly, with the actual rebel hero, we see that they can often be mischaracterized as an outcast or a villain themselves. Viper was first introduced and portrayed as a terrorist figure. Odin was built up as some sort of terrible shame of Wano. Kyros was a notorious hated criminal whose romance with the princess had to be hidden, and that's what makes Loki's potential storyline in Wano so fascinating. Already in Elbaf, we are putting together a lot of the typical figures, but as usual, it's not a copy-paste. Oda does a different spin each arc, so this situation is also unique. We have Shamrock and the God's Knights, of course, who seek to take control of Elbaf, which is the classic Usurper role. However, while we also have a late king, Harold, who was supposedly an extremely great and benevolent king, therefore on paper the perfect good king archetype, we're also getting a lot of suspicious elements surrounding his true nature. And finally, we have Loki. On the one hand, he is built up to be the shame of Elbaf and a terribly evil figure, but at the same time, he may in fact have all the markings of actually being Elbaf's rebel hero figure. A fearsome warrior with an extraordinarily strong will who may be a lot kinder than he seems under the surface, and who may in fact suffer from a reputation that does not actually represent his true character. I would not be surprised if Loki's true nature is deliberately misleading in the story for some time, but the fact remains that Oda is hiding some key piece of truth of what happened with Harold from us for a reason. And Loki, the outcast and the supposed villain, fits in extraordinarily well with other figures of his archetype that we have seen in the past. And finally, that brings me to the most interesting aspect of this whole recurring pattern of characters that we see throughout One Piece. What it really all comes down to is what happened in the Void Century. We know that Oda is an author who absolutely loves taking the end of his story and distilling concepts of it into smaller fragments that make up his early story arcs, such that as time comes on, we are continually shocked by how much the early story arcs seem to foreshadow the end game. I personally believe that it is very likely that the Void Century flashback will heavily feature around the same 4-character archetype. Where we already know the Usurper Imu, we can imagine the leader of the Ancient Kingdom was likely the good king of the time, and finally it's become clear now that Joy Boy was the original rebel hero. Not the king of the Ancient Kingdom or anything like that, but rather a pirate who became the champion of the land to fight back against the Usurper. And when Joy Boy the rebel hero fell, the Ancient Kingdom fell. We may even have an idea of who may have played the princess role all the way back then, but that's maybe getting too speculative. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the additional layers that Oda works into some of his storylines today are all featured in the Void Century flashback, such as the deception angle where the Usurper reframes the Good King as the villain, turning the 20 kingdoms against the Ancient Kingdom. I wouldn't be surprised if, much like Wano or Skypiea, the Ancient Kingdom didn't have a truly perfect utopia, but rather the new dawn that is coming at the end of the Third World will be where we actually get the perfect utopia that improves upon the Ancient Kingdom. And it's also likely that the idea of cycles will be in play in the Ancient Kingdom story as well, considering what we've recently learned about the world resetting twice. So let me know in the comments below how you believe the 4-character archetypes will play out in Elbaf, and if you enjoyed this video then please like and subscribe. And if you want to hear my extended analysis on how Oda tends to use Zoro as an inspiration for the rebel hero figure, as well as what Oda did uniquely with Law in Dressrosa and Momonosuke in Wano, then you can listen to my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon. Link in the description below. And make sure to get your Surfshark deal for $3 a month. Just go to surfshark.com/morge for 4 extra months of Surfshark with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Link in the description below, or just scan the QR code.